Hello, everyone. Brad Hairston here. Welcome to Transform Now. My guest today is Michael Sands, founder of Beacon Advisory Partners, or BeaconAP. Mike's career has been focused on capital markets, and we will hear all about what he's now doing to help this sector with his new firm. And you can bet that AI is right in the center of it. Mike, welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hey, Brad, thanks for having me. Yeah, really excited to be here to talk about GenAI within capital markets. As you alluded to, I've had about 20 years in experience within capital markets, previously in the industry, and then most recently with Accenture doing consulting work, helping drive ops transformation. And on the tail end of that time at Accenture, I was the global GenAI lead, the capital markets practice at Accenture, helping the capital markets industry from asset managers to fund admins to private equity funds adopt and scale generative AI. And as you mentioned, recently exited Accenture to start my own firm, BeaconAP, to help the industry adopt and scale generative AI.
Fantastic. So, Mike, after many years at Accenture and that that role that you mentioned, leading Gen AI for capital markets, what compelled you to leave and start your own firm at this point in time?
I'd say it's the belief in the technology, right? Of thinking about generative AI not as a technology implementation or technology shift, but an overall cultural revolution, right? Impacting human potential, creativity, and the ways of working, and understanding the need of an organization out there that has two things. Number one, dedicated experience within capital markets of how these firms operate, the nuances with the generative AI experience, because that's where we see firms excelling in getting value of generative AI is combining that industry expertise with the capabilities of generative AI. So I saw an opportunity out there to go out and help across the capital markets ecosystem from, again, asset managers, asset owners, private equity, hedge funds, fund admins across the ecosystem to help them both from a strategy and consulting perspective, from change management into implementation. And how we engage with the clients varies by size and who they are. But from a smaller entity size that are early on the adoption, helping them with AI strategy, buy versus build. How do you get started? How do you get people to start using technology? And then the large institutions that we work with who are further on their Gen AI journey, how do you solve specific pain points or business objectives, right? For client onboarding that they're struggling with, how do you use AI/generative AI as an enabler to help solve that business point? So again, we work across the ecosystem from small institutions to large, and certainly believe that generative AI is going to be transforming the financial services industry.
That's awesome. And what kind of firms specifically are you looking to serve in the market? I know there's so many different flavors of companies in the capital markets arena. So talk about that if you would.
Yeah, look, I'd say anyone we could get our hands on within capital markets. But look, a lot of the value now is coming from the revenue generation side of it, right? The asset managers, the private equity funds, private credit, hedge funds, and now on the front office aspects of that. So historically, it has been a general productivity, knowledge management, maybe a little sales and marketing, software development lifecycle. But now there's a lot of traction and conversations and work that we're doing on front office, right? What does this mean for collaboration across investment teams? What does it mean for data integration and helping private equity funds pull in disparate data sets or different PDFs of P&L and bubbling it up? So a lot of traction now on that front end revenue generation side of it. Not to say we're not working with more, of the fund administrators and helping them evolve their value proposition and how they engage, right? How do you shift to a more intelligent operations, and how do you come up with new products and services? Certainly opportunity there, but there's now a lot of traction that a lot of the use cases have been proved out and more of a operations perspective to say, hey, now we can make some larger bets on more revenue generation front office use cases. So certainly interesting time period now.
Yeah. So Mike, if you look at Gen AI on the Gartner hype curve, it's already over the hump. It's in the trough of disillusionment. But I think clearly you're still seeing a lot of opportunity with the types of firms you just mentioned to leverage GenAI, and many have not quite embraced it at all, even at this point. When you're working with these firms, how can you help them create a compelling vision that aligns the technologists, the operators, the business leaders, and what does it take to get that strategic direction moving forward?
Yeah, look, I going back to the point of the belief, I certainly believe a huge opportunity within financial services. So going back to the Accenture days, our research would show that 2/3 of the functions within a capital markets organization will be augmented or impacted with generative AI, and certainly still believe that. And, it all starts with that AI vision, grounded, of course, with the overall firm objectives, and, alignment with what the business wants to do. The three really key things there, which, I'd say is probably no huge surprise, is number one, leadership alignment. And to me, a lot of that is excitement, right? These folks obviously aren't hands on the keyboard type of folks. So how do you show them this technology? How do you get them inspired? How do you get them to believe that this can transform their organization, either as an enabler or even fear of, hey, their competitors are doing this, or hey, this could disrupt your business model? How do you get leadership aligned and bought in, ideally all the way up to the CEO? The second is bringing the right people to the table. So going back to the prior point, hey, this isn't a tech initiative. It's a business initiative. It's a people initiative. So how do you bring in people from not only a technical organization, but the lines of business and your data folks and your security and risk, and bringing all those people together? And then overall culture. Again, this is impacting individuals. People are using it even if you don't give it to them and allow them to do it. So bringing in that culture, the skill set, the chief HR officer, that chief people officer, all aligning to that vision and coming up with that AI strategy of buy versus build. Where does it fit in? How do we align it? And then again, grounded with the overall business objective of the organization. So you'll probably hear me, Brad, a broken record a lot, hitting upon people, culture, change management, because I absolutely believe in people and the excitement, but leading with that versus leading with the technology and how can it fit in with an overall organization.
Yeah. I hear that Accenture background coming forward.
Yeah. I'm trying to avoid words like synergies and transformation and all that as much as I can. But yeah, I was there for a long time.
Yeah. You and I didn't talk about this, but I started my career at Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture. And some of those same core concepts were in play back when I started with them, which was back in the 90s, a long time ago. So anyway, I do appreciate that. I do appreciate it. So Mike, you talked about inspiring and motivating the leaders in these companies to take a look at large language models and GenAI and really understand what it can do for their companies. I understand that you experiment with tools like image and video creators to help them down that path, to help them get comfortable with this concept of a large language model. Can you share an example of how firms have successfully used this approach to build excitement and reduce skepticism about GenAI?
Yeah, and look, using those tools, if it's either ChatGPT or some of the multimodal tools out there of, Runway creating images or videos or audio or things like that, is really what got me excited a couple of years ago, and hence, spitting out to start BeaconAP. I'll use one very practical example now. So, Brett, as we mentioned, both grew up in consulting, and I've been doing it for about 20 years. And historically, when you go on a sales pitch or you're presenting, you go in with slides, you have your use cases, yada, yada, yada. No longer the case, right? So as I'm meeting with clients, I'm not going with slides and what could be, I'm going in with what exists. So I'm creating, if it's a application or a build project of creating a UI, creating a Figma-like MVP that I could do in 5 minutes for essentially free. And I'm going in with the application already and showing, hey, look at this. This is what you could have. This is how it can operate, and getting them excited and pushing further on that sales cycle to show that. And, I use that as a sales process, but if you're using that for an actual production build, just think about the time you could take out not having to write requirements or being able to iterate or change on the fly. You could even go further out of, hey, what does this mean to the skill sets in a product owner or product manager versus, a developer, and can you tweak on the fly? But that's one aspect that, we use at BeaconAP to do that. Thinking of other examples internally, if it's speaking at conferences or presentations, leading again with that excitement, even if the examples are non-financial services or non-alignment to the client that you're presenting to, get people excited, show the capability, show the power of large language models. One thing I always hit upon when speaking to leadership early on, if they're not familiar with generative AI a lot, is, hey, what's different now versus 3 years ago, right? What's the difference between generative AI and large language models and traditional AI? And really grounding there, because again, a lot of these leaders are hands-on and they may not be in a tech ecosystem environment where they're familiar with it, but what is different, right? And it's things like, just the overall power and capability of large language models due to the amount of compute and data going into it. It's the accessibility of these, right? Pretty much anyone can go on to chatgpt.com and interact with them. They're essentially free to go out and do it. You interact with them in human language, right? English language or other languages. You don't need to be a data scientist or technologist to interact with them. It's there, right? And the people can access with it. So hitting upon what is different between then versus now, and then leading with that excitement, and then tying that into, the use cases and how it's applicable to a capital markets institution. So that's one thing that I really found, powerful. Like one thing I did, I was presenting in Paris, right? And admittedly, I only speak English. So, I started the presentation with a AI generated picture of me, which if you see, it's on LinkedIn right there. Mine was outdated about 15 years. I said, hey, I don't want to pay $1,000 for a professional photo. I'm going to use GenAI to do it, which was a fun exercise. That one's pretty good. Some of the other ones came out kind of comical, so it's not perfect. I had a Steve Jobs kind of look-alike with the black turtleneck. But, I used that picture, then I had it speak, do the presentation for me, and then I had it do the presentation for me in French. And then I got up, the image got up and looked around. But again, that was just used to drive excitement, to engage with people, to show the power of large language models, then lead into, hey, this is how it can apply to the use cases, right? Client reporting, front office research, or sales support.
Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity with the use of avatars, creating an avatar of yourself, letting it say something in 10 different languages. I've played around with that myself, and it's amazing how easy it is to do and how effective the technology works in that realm.
Evolving so quickly too.
I
like those blogs or newsletters that people follow. They do the same prompt, or they do the same picture every year or every iteration of a large language model, and you could see the evolution of it getting better and better. And it's just happening so quickly. It's tough to stay on top of.
Yeah. Mike, what about the area of information delivery? That's so critical in the capital markets arena. So how do you see GenAI transforming that space?
Yeah, similar to the prior question, right? I think this is an interesting one. And I think people are talking about it in spotted areas, but it could drastically change, right? So if we go back 10 years ago, like a project that I would do was, how could traditional AI or natural language generation be used for, let's say, client reporting, right? That goes out monthly or quarterly. And how do you use NLG to go in and say, hey, your performance and attribution is this, that, and the other thing, and linking it with, the numbers and the metric, coming up with commentary and broad market outlook and things like that.
Yeah.
Compared to now, right? This is a good example of traditional versus large language models of how could LLMs be used today, right? And it's highly customized commentary on those reports, and being able to individualize those across your different client segments of, again, coming up with top movers in the commentary around a broad market outlook, PM commentary. So that's one pointed example of then versus now. But as we look forward, that's the fun part to talk about, right? Of, hey, are these outdated monthly, quarterly client reports going to be the way information is delivered? And is that how folks want it? Firms of the last 10 years within capital markets have been investing in this client experience, client servicing model, and viewing that as a differentiator, right? Going back to the rise of passive funds. How do we make ourselves different and provide value to our end clients and be different than our peers? And reporting, information delivery, and client services is one of those, and we'll continue to do so. So thinking creatively, like, one example out there, I think it was about a month ago from UBS. Now, this was on their investment bank side, but you alluded to it a little bit, Brad, of using digital avatars to share investment research to their clients. So it's already starting of disrupting of how information is shared. So I think there's a lot of room for creativity. I don't think this will happen overnight because financial services are somewhat stuck in their ways, but it's fun to think about the way information can be delivered either via a video, information, interactive, right? Having an avatar that you can then ask follow-up questions just like you would for an individual, or spinning out via podcast or things like that. So the opportunities are out there, and it'll just go to client appetite, and seeing other firms that will explore similar to what UBS did.
Yeah. I fully expect AI will replace me as a podcaster in the near future. Don't you know my days are numbered doing what we're doing here?
You still have my views, Brad. No matter what.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Mike, GenAI certainly has the potential to also reduce dependency on external providers. How do you see fund administrators and vendors adapting to this disruption? And how are you advising them to stay competitive in a GenAI driven environment that we're in?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It goes back to the point I mentioned, Ray. I certainly believe that GenAI has the potential to shift the center of gravity of the value creation. And if asset managers can use generative AI to automate client reporting, data recon, compliance workflows, puts natural pressure on fund admins and vendors to evolve. Now, I do think this will be gradual. The relationships between, clients and admins and vendors are typically large. They're complex, they're sticky, they're based in trust, but absolutely think that there's going to be disruption in this space, given by the capabilities that Gen AI allows firms to do. So things around software development lifecycle to spin up pointed applications. We go back to the client reporting example, the ability to create that customization in-house and tweak those reports to pulling in, data aggregation and insights and intelligence there. I think it will be different between the large admins and vendors versus the smaller admins. I do think the smaller firms are at risk here of being disrupted if they don't embrace generative AI. The ability of larger firms, larger admins to work further down the food chain, again, with the ability to create code quicker, to personalize the interaction, to drive more customization, where historically, the large admins focus on standardization and scale. So if they're coming further down the food chain, as well as the end clients, again, are not looking for outsourcing as much or partnerships with fund admins, maybe getting it from kind of both ends there. So absolutely think that, certainly the small fund admins, but across the board really need to be ahead of the curve here, and shifting to, looking at opportunities of generative AI, where to invest, where it matters, experiment with purpose, look at creative partnerships, and ultimately trends to a intelligent platform perspective. So this is one that I think doesn't get as much attention, but it's the snowballing impact of generative AI. So we talk about fund operations or fund administration, either, at an asset manager or fund admin or the like. But if you're using generative AI, let's just say across your operations, and you're saving down commentary of exceptions, you're saving down an end-of-day NAV report card, you're saving down error reports, or on from the sales side, right? If you're recording the calls and you're saving down action items and summary in your transcript, you could then put prompt engineering on top of that to ask those questions, to pull out those intelligence. And as fund administrators or other organizations have cost pressures or people retire, that institutional knowledge of the organization is maintained there with prompt engineering and generative AI. So the importance of getting ahead of this early to develop those intelligent platforms, to save down that knowledge. Again, you could put prompt engineering to pull that up to folks and say, hey, when did something like this happen before? Hey, when there was a break like this, what did we do? Hey, how common is this? And to pull those insights. So small to large admins or organizations, I think all need to trend in that direction of thinking the intelligence that GenAI can use to then be repurposed for institutional knowledge. But absolutely from a small fun admin perspective of thinking, how do they shift, be ahead of innovation before they get disrupted by either the larger competitors or their clients themselves?
Well, something else that's causing a lot of disruption in the market is agentic AI, which if you go back to the Gartner hype curve, it's already nearing the peak, which is hard to believe because it really didn't surface, in earnest until like last year, I want to say. So boy, things are moving fast. You could already be to the top of the hype curve that quickly now.
Everyone's favorite word. Yeah.
So talk about how you're advising these companies, and looking at Gen AI as kind of a stair step to agentic. I know, they're reading the same articles. They're hearing all the hype about agentic AI, but for many of them, if they haven't done anything with AI, that may not be the right first step. So talk about that. Talk about the maturity curve and kind of how you navigate them down that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see it in 3 hops. So the first being pilots and experimentation. Most firms have gone through this, not all, but this is the use case, experimenting, learning, exploring, figuring out what sticks, and starting to think about how you approach it. The second is platforms, right? So pilots to platforms, and this is, Brad, in some of the items that you're hitting upon. How do you shift towards an agentic architecture? How do you shift to building an orchestration layer to pull in different agents? How do you disrupt your workflows, right? How do you disrupt your processes and really change how the organization works to achieve value and recognize the capabilities of generative AI? And we're starting to certainly see that. And then the third phase is people, right? People. And what I mean by that is not only the people, the skill sets and talent, but the operating model and how is that shifting and being impacted. So for example, I mentioned it earlier, okay, if I am a product manager, a product owner, I could do some of the development, what does that mean to the skill set, the relationship? If I'm a salesperson and I have access to law advice or marketing, what does that mean to the roles and the skill sets there? And is there a shift from roles based on functions to more skill sets? Or how do the teams fit together? And how do you reward and incentivize people, right? How do you create that overall model where, your best people are going to want to be using Gen AI and they're going to be aggressive and maybe they leave or have side hustles and putting up mobile apps on their phone because they have all these capabilities and options out there. So how do you manage the op model on the people side? And I think all that needs to be pulled in, but really people are on that second hop of platforms and how do you shift to agents and agentic architecture? And of course you have to get started and you have to learn. The larger firms that are further along on this are, looking at both buy versus build and how AI and Gen AI can be embedded. And the larger firms are looking at more of a hub and spoke model internally to build out an agentic architecture. So creating internally within either the technology team, their innovation team, or under the chief AI officer of the hub and spoke model of creating what are the core components that we want to maintain within a internal COE. So things of like a RAG architecture, the large language models, either open source or closed source that you maintain, security protocols, guardrails, and the guardian agent that people are talking about. So how do you create that hub and spoke model of those core components internally to have transparency and enable it? And then the spoke out to the lines of business that can spin up different agents and capabilities and iterate quickly with perhaps domain specific data or information. So we see that with the larger firms of trending towards that type of platform to achieve agentic architecture. The smaller firms are still leaning more on the vendors that are out there. So this could be a, Copilot Studio within Microsoft. This could be some of the agentic applications out there like N8N or Make or Zapier or the others, or some of the more out of the box solutions, like Lean or Writer firms out there that allow you to do the put a click and drop and create that workflow, and that you see that similar to RPA that has been done with you guys, of being able to see that, just empowering that capability that you guys have with the large language models. And the benefit of that piece or applications like that is really putting it in the user's hands. And I think that's super important with the right guardrails and training. But how do you just put this in the hands of the users? How do you empower them, get them using? Because I do view it's more of a general purpose technology, like a computer, like an internet, like your smartphone. In the right way, just get it in the hands of the users and let them explore, let them be creative, let them innovate, let them help themselves. And how do you give them the right tools and the right way to create applications for themselves that are beneficial? So again, larger firms trending towards that platform-based approach, and then the smaller firms leaning more on out-of-the-box solutions that are more plug and play, that business users can iterate through and create their own applications. But it's all moving so quickly, so it's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out.
Yeah, for sure. What have you found to be the biggest obstacles to adopting AI, and how do you help your clients overcome those?
Yeah, look, I'll keep them simple, and it's some of the same things I hit upon. I said it'd be a tad of a broken record, right? But the first one is that buy versus build decision, and it is challenging with how quickly the technology is evolving and how many solutions are out there. So, hey, do we want to wait for our large vendors to roll solutions out, like a Salesforce, a Workday, ServiceNow, Bloomberg, right? Do we want to wait and leverage the capabilities they have? Do we want to partner with a small fintech or startup or pointed solution there? And, I'm sure, Brad, you see it inundated with so many, it makes your eyeballs spin. And I've been living this, 24 hours a day the last, couple of years, and hard for me to stay up to date with all the new vendors that are coming out there. Or do you want to, again, go to a build solution or assemble a solution, right? Not recommending building a large language model, but pulling in those different components to assemble and pull it all together. So it's certainly a challenging decision to fit the right balance, right? Of how do you innovate, but not outdate your technology strategy with your AI strategy. And firms are taking different approaches through it. You kind of quoted Gartner a little bit. They highlight it, and they come up with about 40% being around leveraging embedded solutions on your large vendors. And I think it was about 35% build and 20% pointed solutions, or I might have it backwards. But their point being, the answer is going to be a combination of all of it. And the larger firms will focus more on internal build, with the smaller firms leveraging more out-of-the-box solutions. For smaller firms, what I recommend is, placing two bets. I'll leave the larger firms because they're well along on this journey. Again, they'll have a mixture and combination of it all. I certainly lean a little bit more toward the build side than others now, just for playing with the tools and understanding how powerful they are. But from a smaller client perspective, take two bets, right? Take one that is a sure thing, a safe bet, right? Maybe something around software development lifecycle, data management, be something around sales and marketing, knowledge management, something that you see you can prove out, maybe a tad pointed. And if that's a pointed solution or something you spin up yourself, fine, just go with it, prove out the value, take the win, and roll it up to leadership and have that business case with it. And then take a bet on something a tad more risky. If it's creating agentic architecture, if it's something more for front office research that, hey, maybe it hasn't been fully proved out, but there's a large risk return model behind it. So again, take a safe bet, prove it out, take your win, have the business case, and then at the same time, be a little risky, be a little creative, and take that other bet, typically a little bit more on a build perspective. The other piece, so that first one is just the rate of change and the classic buy versus build. The second piece is an org readiness. So, many organizations still lack a clear strategy to evolve their op model, workforce, culture for an AI native future, right? Gen AI doesn't wait for your culture to catch up. It moves fast, it enables individuals, it skips processes, it rewrites the roles. And I go back to it that this isn't about the tech. The tech is there, right? You hear people quote of, hey, even if these large language models don't improve at all going forward, there's still massive amount of transformation with how powerful these models are. And it's taking the workflows and the processes and the people to catch up to how powerful these already are. So that last piece is org readiness, business readiness, training, lead with excitement, inspiration, break the ways of working, right? Come up with micro habits to get people to use this technology. Think of creative ways, like don't use your standard playbook to roll this out. Be exciting, be different, lead with the people, start thinking about those aspects of impacting the op model, the skill sets, the roles. And I think that heavily has been under invested and drastically needs to be pulled in to see the value here. Smaller firms will be able to move quicker there, larger firms a little bit more stuck in their ways, but that would probably be the key thing is how do you pull the people aspect further up on the process?
Yeah, those approaches sound really, really great. And no doubt there are lots of firms out there that could use those types of methodologies to really make progress in AI. So it's been a privilege talking to you today. I really appreciate you joining the podcast, and it's been fun hearing about BeaconAP. And you have certainly a lot of opportunity to help firms with your expertise and your experience. And I wish you the very best.
Thanks, Fred. Likewise. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.